Thank you so much. And yeah, good afternoon to everybody. Firstly, just thank you for taking time out and joining us. And yeah, thanks for CUBO for giving us this opportunity this afternoon. So I think first things first, I think met some of you probably early part of the year back in Newcastle at the conference. And today really is hopefully giving you a little bit more insight into the Utopi platform and some of the benefits that we've been able to bring to students, managers of buildings and sort of student residences, and those who are responsible for their sort of upkeep. So just going to give you a flavour of what we're going to go through today. So first of all, I'm going to take you through a little bit around who are Utopi and why Utopi. A little bit around a look ahead, or this bit around continual development of the sort of platform. And Chanel's going to take you through that, and then bringing Utopi to life. Stuart's going to join us and take us through that sort of piece. Then we're going to do a little bit of a sort of a fireside chat through a few questions, and then we're going to open it up hopefully to the floor, yeah, to take some of your sort of questions. So as part of that, as we go through the slides, anything that comes top of mind, please drop it in the chat. And as we sort of go through, we'll be looking at the sort of questions, and then an opportunity to review those right at the end. But I guess we're going to do some introductions sort of first of all. So first of all, my name's Richard Brenner. I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon. I'm an advisor for Utopi, and my connection with them actually started at client side about 4 years ago, and over the last 2 years have worked with them on around their sort of product, but mainly sort of recently on some of their growth. And element of why we're sort of here today is starting to look at that sort of HE sort of sector, but specifically sort of universities. And part of my background is I've been in and around the HE sector in a multitude of roles, and it's frightening when I was looking at it yesterday, for about 22 years. So hopefully being able to bring and support the team in this sort of journey of theirs. So I'm going to hand over to Chanel, who will introduce herself, and on to sort of Stuart. So Chanel, to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Chanel Turner-Ross. I'm proudly Head of Marketing at Utopi. I've been with the business now for just under 3 years, and I helped the business grow. We had quite an infamous 500% revenue growth year from 23 to 24, so very proud to have been a part of that story. You'll hear from my accent. I'm originally from New Zealand, and when I worked back home, I worked with some of the biggest brands in real estate across New Zealand and Australia, and then since moving to the UK and moving up to Scotland, I've specialised on the technology side. So I'm all about brand development, copywriting, marketing, comms. And today I will be taking you through some of the Utopi product solutions. Stuart?
Thanks, Chanel. Hi, I'm Stuart Patterson. I'm aware that I've got a very strong Scottish accent, so I will do my very best to put on my Sunday voice today. I am head of customer success at Utopi, so I look after the team who work very closely with our customers in terms of understanding the data, what the insights are telling us, and potentially what interventions we might then want to put in place from the data we see. I also work really closely with the product team to gain essential feedback from the site teams, operations teams around ultimately kind of what their requirements are and how we can develop the product to kind of help support and meet your best operational practices. So yeah, that's a quick summary of myself.
Perfect, thanks both. So let's get into it. First of all is who are Utopi? And interestingly, when we came to the CUBO early part of the year, there was really just probably a small amount of sort of knowledge and understanding who Utopi sort of are. But primarily, they are a smart building sort of platform that's really targeted towards sort of multi-tenanted businesses or buildings, should I say, helping using data to help operators, owners of those buildings maintain the sort of quality of their sort of buildings. And that really sort of takes sort of data from sort of the ESG sort of part all the way through to energy efficiency and sort of resident engagement. So there's a breadth of capability that the platform sort of brings. And part of that breadth is, with data at the absolute sort of center of that, is being able to take that data into meaningful and actionable insights to support operations to ultimately have a positive impact. And that could be around reducing costs out of an organization, or reducing carbon and supporting businesses on their sort of carbon and net zero journey. So a little bit of the Utopi journey, sort of first of all. So formed in sort of 2019. The business is now sort of 6 years old, and as I said, it was centered on the start of being able to use data to address actual issues that owners and managers of sort of buildings sort of had at the time. And very quickly after that, the platform was sort of launched, being able to take a data sort of platform into an operational platform to start realizing that data into those meaningful insights. And as the journey has continued, a key part of the differentiator of Utopi is about using that sort of data to build their proposition today, but also build it out for the future. So solving identified problems from that sort of data, and really putting that sort of data to work. So why sort of Utopi, and what is it? Why Utopi, I guess. Lots of solutions across the sort of market, but certainly some of the key attributes from the sort of platform that we're sort of keen to share is the platform is all around sort of low cost and low disruption. We'll take you through the different sort of component parts of it sort of shortly, but the ability to retrofit a solution into a particular sort of building is really easy, really simple, and really not particularly sort of disruptive for sort of students and sort of occupants around there. In and out of a particular sort of bedroom is minutes, not hours. The platform also develops into a sort of fully automated sort of control sort of platform that allows you then to manage those sort of buildings in a really sort of proactive sort of way. Again, data through the center of it, but then addressing things like taking costs out, so reducing sort of consumption that then supports things like carbon sort of reduction. Over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, as you saw from the roadmap, is they've worked with a multitude of sort of partners, primarily in the sort of PBSA sort of space across UK, but also internationally as well. And currently today, partnering with about 50% of the operators and managers within the private or purpose-built student accommodation sort of sector, and has about 15 to 20% of their estates within that, and growing pretty much on a sort of week by week sort of basis. And as the reason why we're here, really delighted at the start of the year being able to partner with sort of CUBO and start to come in and have sort of conversations with the sort of university sort of landscape as well. In terms of the work that has been undertaken from the platform itself, we're always really keen to understand around the sort of sectors that we sort of work in. So through this, we've met with a number of sort of stakeholders around the sort of HE sort of landscape to really understand some of the problems that are being faced on a sort of day-to-day sort of basis. In no particular order, but these are the general sort of themes that we've sort of found out through some of our sort of discussions, some of the sort of research that yourselves are facing on a pretty sort of frequent basis. Cost control, I don't think we have to labour on that point sort of too much. In terms of energy and utility expenses is pretty large and can be pretty complex across the estate. So the ability to manage that and have tools to manage that is quite key. Engagement around sort of student, the experience that students sort of have is always front and sort of forefront of sort of mind. So being able to manage utilities, which can be, a really sort of emotive issue, in an engaging ways is really sort of key. In some of the conversations I had, it's just some of the basics, consumption insights. How do we get greater, or how do you get greater awareness of sort of consumption? And as part of that is being able to surface real time sort of data, and in some cases, some of that data has been months in sort of out of date. And then looking at sort of asset or sort of building performance, what building consumes more utilities than another, and how can you start to understand that sort of performance of those individual sort of buildings. And then finally, huge efforts have been sort of identified, or future activities, should I say, around individual sort of journeys into sort of net zero. And I think it's fair to say through some of those sort of conversations is no one institute is the same, and certainly after my time around the sort of sector, I've certainly felt and sort of seen that. But these really were some of those themes that some of those conversations identified. So with that, what I'm just going to give you is just a real flavour then. So we've talked a little bit about Utopi, the journey that they've been on, but really what is it? The platform and how Utopi manages some of those points is made up of sort of three component sort of parts. The first piece is that sort of data business, that data analytics sort of element, underpinned by the sort of the data sort of platform that brings all that data into sort of meaningful insights. The second component part of that is, well, we've got some great data, but what else can we do with that? Well, we can put some control into that. And the second part of the sort of platform is around control. So whether you've got wet systems, electric sort of systems, there are solutions to help use that data to instantaneously make changes to heating on a room by room sort of basis. And the third sort of element is around sort of resident sort of student engagement, being able to engage the wider sort of experience, or wider sort of participants in sort of energy management, energy control is a real key part of their sort of offer. But it's done so not in a sort of overt way, in a sort of nudging, engagement and sort of educational way around, what are their behaviours in terms of energy sort of management. And all that is then supported by the customer impact sort of team, which I'll leave to Stuart to talk about a little bit sort of later. And as part of the sort of platform, I'm going to briefly introduce you to how do we get all that sort of data, and it's driven by that device on the screen, a multi-sensor that captures those 6 attributes on a room by room sort of basis. And as I said, it's something small and simple to install that can be installed within sort of minutes. But it's using those multi-sensor or those sort of key attributes, or those key sort of metrics, that informs not only just the control aspect, but gives you a broader sort of sense of what's happening in that sort of particular sort of room. And that starts to then bring this into the platform itself, and being able to have a real intuitive sort of platform that gives you the oversight of a room, of a building, of a whole estate, depending on how that sort of structured within the individual sort of universities. So anybody that's got access to a laptop will be able to see and control the sort of platform and the sort of performance of the sort of data. And then finally, before I hand over, is very quick introduction on the journey, the platform itself. But in terms of the approach that Utopi sort of take in terms of managing and working with clients, it's a really sort of simple sort of four-step sort of phase. And the first bit is around sort of measure and control. So using and installing the multi-sensor device, first of all, is to understand what is happening in individual sort of businesses or individual sort of buildings, and start to identify what control measures could be put in place. The second stage is around then, okay, optimizing that. So there could be some control that's put in. It could be just as simple as engaging with students in terms of adjusting behaviors. But then once you've got the data, you're easily informed then to maintain those improvements. Thirdly, then there's a piece around decarbonize. So we're getting some really rich data now from the buildings, and with typically the aging estate across sort of universities where retrofits might be needed in terms of boilers, etc., the data then starts to inform actually right sizing investment for future sort of capital projects. So it's not just about the immediate benefits here and now, it's about that sort of long-term sort of life cycle and CapEx program where the data can support. And then going forward, it's about having the platform that ensuring that once those changes are made, it's the constantly refining them and ensuring that all the benefit that has been reached and realized upstream is maintained and sustained on a sort of going sort of basis. But I think it'd be really, really useful just to pass over and bring sort of Stuart into the conversation around, well, the impact, what does it actually achieve? So yeah, Stuart, over to yourself.
Thanks, Richard. If you could skip on to the next slide, that would be great. I guess kind of ultimately the technology that we install is ultimately an enabler for data collection. And Richard and Chanel have mentioned that, we collect, or we have, over 30 billion data points. And I think at the moment at scale, we're probably adding, give or take, a billion data points to that every kind of 4 to 6 weeks at the moment. If I'm being really honest, when we start talking about things in the billions, it tends to lose meaning for me personally. But we do have an extensive data set. But I spend quite a lot of time in the data. And what I say all the time is the data only has value if we validate it, if we understand it, if we take action on it, and more importantly, we're able to measure the success or the impact that those interventions actually have. And with that, what we're bringing to the market, or what we have kind of brought to the market and still developing, as Chanel mentioned, are data and insights that we haven't seen before and haven't been available to us. We've been able to understand how assets perform by looking at key metrics such as what does our main meter consumption look like, and does that fit within budget? But what we haven't done previously, or been able to do at scale, is understand what's going on within the building and what impact that then has on energy consumption and ultimately then budgets. So when we talk about at Utopi, we have an impact team. We talk about impact as a service, and what does that kind of look like? We've developed a team of experts within the data set that we have. That team view ourselves as an extension of your operational team, and they're tasked with ultimately, I guess, bringing this data to life. We talk about billions of data points, and that's great, but in reality, what does that look like, and what does it mean to everybody? So with the Utopi product actually comes impact as a service, and like I mentioned there, that's essentially an extension of your operational team. Our team will help with platform training based on the data that we have on your buildings. For example, we'll set up key reports and alerts. We'll make recommendations on existing controls, or recommendations on new controls that we implement. There isn't a one size fits all. Thermodynamics in buildings are all completely different. So we look at optimization as a little bit of science and a little bit of art, if I'm honest. And the other thing that we do, and Chanel mentioned this earlier on, is about kind of helping streamline your operational practices. So it's taking the data and insights that we've got and hopefully making the operations teams' lives easier on the ground, and making them more efficient. But yeah, like I said, bringing that data to life in the form of actionable insights and ultimately identifying opportunities for intervention, that's ultimately key. That's what we're in here to do, is to decarbonize the industry. Richard, if you could skip to the next slide, that would be lovely. It would have been good if we had a slick way of doing this rather than me asking every time, but we'll
Nod your head.
We'll learn. I'll nod my head. I guess excuse me, one of the kind of I guess first things or key things that the impact team will do here is understand asset level performance, and we do that by benchmarking your assets with the energy consumption. We do that by essentially looking at your main meter data, the type of asset that you've got. Is it gas? Is it electrically heated? What does your domestic hot water look like? And then we divide that energy consumption really simply by the number of beds or studios or apartments that you've got, and that gives us a fairly consistent kind of data set to benchmark on, which is kilowatt hour consumption per bed per day, which is a consistent, digestible and understandable metric for everybody. Once we've identified buildings or groups of buildings or parts of a building where there's opportunity for improvement, what we'll then do is we'll peel the layers back on the data set that we've got, and that could be data that we've ingested from other third parties such as energy providers, or data from the Utopi multi-sensor. I'll just very quickly hold a multi-sensor up just so we can see, and I'll put it against my iPhone here just so we can see how small and neat a device it actually is. Once we take all of that, or look at that kind of key metric, like I said, we'll peel the layers back a little bit, and we'll then start to look at kind of other key metrics such as average building temperature year on year, against a wider portfolio or against the kind of wider industry. We'll look at the percentage of overheated spaces, for example. So we would look at things like the UK Energy Saving Trust, and anything over kind of 24 degrees we would kind of class as overheated. And then we'd also look at things like occupancy levels to kind of understand what our opportunities may look like. I'll do a big nod, Richard. Thank you. So when I'm asked to kind of run through some of the insights and some of the stuff we do, I find it really difficult to narrow it down, because the data can tell so many stories, and identify so many different opportunities for intervention. But I just wanted to give a kind of couple of examples of the things that we see very quickly in assets once our technology is installed in them. One example on a PBSA asset down south, what we actually saw was that the building was just significantly overheated, and what we identified was that the original heating system, when it was installed, was incorrectly calibrated. So the thermostat and the actual heating device were 4 degrees out from each other. So when a resident, for example, was putting their heating up to 26 degrees, the heater was actually going up to 30 and not 26. So we found a huge amount of overheating and a huge amount of energy waste within that asset. And that technology had been in there for nearly 2 years before we were able to identify that. Another interesting one that we found, which was in an asset in it was Belfast in Ireland actually, was that when the heating system was retrofitted in that asset during an upgrade, what had happened was the mapping was slightly out. So the thermostat in one room was controlling the heater in another. So you had someone in room 118, for example, controlling the heating in room 23, and there was no two spaces in that site that were actually mapped correctly. So you had Jane overcooking Steve, and you had Adam overcooking Alan, for example. And that had been in place for 18 months, but we were then able to identify it through the temperature and energy consumption data that we had available to us. But again, that system had been in place for 18 months. And then one of the other things we were able to identify at that asset was the percentage of people using windows to regulate temperature was a lot higher than we see across the rest of the industry, and that was simply just because people weren't in control of their own heating system. And then again, this wasn't widely known to Utopi until we started to kind of analyse the data, but your 90th percentile or top 10% of energy users will account for, give or take, 35% of your annual energy consumption. And I've got a very specific case on that I'll talk about. I'll talk about a few slides later. But also we find out how enterprising students and residents actually are. We regularly find residents overwriting the heating controls that they've got in place by downloading the manufacturer's warranty and overwriting the heating system, and then having a free reign. And then ultimately, as with that, is a huge amount of overconsumption on energy. But these are just a couple of examples. But yeah, perfect, Richard. Next slide would be great. So I just wanted to chat through, just we've talked about interventions and we've talked about resident engagement. I think it's really important that we talk about the impact of the interventions that we've put in place or we've supported operators with. Carter's Yard is a 127 bed accommodation in Dundee in Scotland. The challenge, excuse me, that the asset manager here had was actually that across their portfolio, it looked like there was kind of excessive energy consumption for the size of the portfolio. Following the installation of the environmental sensor and energy submeters, we were able to determine that a lot of the overconsumption was due to overheating and limitations on their existing heating controls that were effectively binary. Once they were on until someone interacted with them. We helped at the time, and what we didn't want to do was implement another capital project, and we wanted to show the impact of the data that we had before we looked at anything else. And the impact team here worked really closely with the operations team on site, and we helped them develop a simple, easy to implement resident engagement campaign, which focused on ultimately the kind of environmental impact of overheating, and residents were able to win prizes if they were if they were able to reduce their energy consumption. We measured that over the whole 200-day heating season, and the impact of that was an energy reduction of 89,000 kilowatt hours, which for most people kind of go, oh, that seems like a big number, but that equates to nearly £28,500 worth of energy saving, and £19,000 worth of or 19k thousand kilograms of carbon reduced. Another example around resident engagement through the energy and temperature and occupancy data within these assets, we were able to identify an issue when apartments were actually unoccupied. In that unoccupied apartments, there wasn't a significant reduction in temperature, nor was there a significant reduction in energy consumption. So working with the operator, we sent out a really simple survey to residents, and the feedback from that highlighted that there was a lack of understanding on, one, how the heating controls worked, but more importantly, the impact that this had on residents. Now, we're aware that residents are hyper aware of global warming and climate change, but around 80% of them actually don't know the impact their behaviour has on the environment. So it's all around education in this instance. So with this operator, what we were able to do was turn the actionable insights into what we proudly call the Grinch campaign, and we talk about this campaign quite a lot because it's really powerful. It's effectively a social sustainability campaign, and it was really simple messaging, and it was how to manage the heating when I'm not at home, and the positive impact that it's going to have in the community. And what we're doing is just empowering residents to take them on that kind of, empower them and bring them along on the operator's environmental and decarbonisation journey. And the data story here is really quite telling. What we have across the board is a 45% or 20,000 kilogram reduction in carbon in unoccupied spaces based on the previous year. And it's really powerful. We identified an opportunity, we put an intervention in place, and we're able to easily and successfully measure the impact that had at the back end. So yeah, really interesting success story here. And this is quite a telling case study, actually. So this was a 290 bed PBSA building in Birmingham. This asset was significantly overheated, which was having a problem, one, on resident experience, but secondly on operational budgets. We initially just installed the Utopi multi-sensor, and we were able to identify the impact of overheating. What we then did was we ingested the data from the existing meters that were installed in that building, so we're able to understand the impact that overheating actually had. At the time, all Utopi were able to do was recommend an upgrade of the existing panel heaters with some sort of boost functionality control, which made them less binary, so they weren't just on or off. And the impact of that technology was really significant. What it actually did was produce a saving of £327 per bed per year on energy consumption. However, only a 7% reduction in overheated spaces, but a significant impact. And at that point, that was a kind of, and Chanel touched on this earlier on, that was a kind of aha moment for Utopi, because the operator had said to us, "You're recommending these controls, why don't you have that as a product?" And we were like, yeah, we absolutely should have that as a product. And actually, with the existing technology we've got in the building, what we were able to do was then develop an integrated heating system that benefited from the existing technology that we've got in the smart environmental sensor. So we then developed that technology, and what we did was we installed it in the existing panel heaters. So it was a really low cost, easy retrofit solution. And that, I guess, kind of control upgrade, what that allowed the operator to do was have a centralized control over the whole asset, but also be able to maximize resident experience and comfort by creating room level exceptions. And one of the key things that we're able to do with that technology, because we can identify occupancy levels through the Utopi multi-sensor, is if there's no motion in a space for a certain period of time, the technology will just turn the heating down and keep it at a comfortable level, and make sure that we reduce energy consumption. And then again, I guess ultimately what we get out of that is kind of marginal gains. So we saw a 30% reduction in overheated spaces, so great, maximising resident experience and resident comfort, and then a further saving of £73 per bed over a heating season. So really positive story, the kind of before what the original intervention was, and then what the second kind of advanced technology intervention looked like. Richard, if you could skip to the next slide. This is, and it's great to see numbers, but I really like to see temperature distribution graphs. So the top graph here, we can see that the original intervention and the impact that it had on energy reduction, and then the Utopi intervention was a further 1.4 kilowatt hours per bed per day. So like I said earlier on, marginal gains, but again, a significant reduction, which this year we've been able to show and prove that reduction has been sustainable year on year, which is really positive. But if you look at the bottom graph, the distribution of temperature bell curve, the red line, or the red distribution curve, was the original solution. The green line in the middle again was the was the panel heaters with the booster switches, and the blue line was the introduction of the Utopi technology with the occupancy step down, and you can see the significant reduction in overheated spaces there, where those marginal gains have been made. Next slide, please, Richard. This is my favourite one. So we've talked about what interventions we can do at building level, and what the data is telling us. But what I wanted to do was just highlight, when we talk about outlier management and the impact that you could, a top 10% of residents can have on a building, and the impact that even a simple conversation can have. So this is an apartment in one of our PBSA buildings, where the top graph, or the top table on the left hand side, I should say, we can see, and it's very, very small, but there's an apartment here that's consuming 50 kilowatt hours of electricity a day. To put that in perspective, your UK average sized home will consume, give or take, 8. So for a student to be consuming 50 kilowatt hours a day is significant, and that was 1200% above site average. So what we looked at, things like occupancy levels, which were actually really quite low, and we looked at things like air quality, and everything looked great other than energy consumption. So we had a chat to the operator went up, had a chat to the resident, and actually what the resident was doing was mining for Bitcoin. So you can see on the 2nd of December here, the resident had agreed that they would unplug one of their servers, which had ultimately half the energy consumption that they were consuming, and they went down to 27 kilowatt hours. Now, within a couple of days, it went back up, and the operator went back round to another conversation, and then after that, maintained at 27 kilowatt hours a day. Again, still very, very high. But if we look at the impact over the tenancy period, we can see that actually that's a £3,250 saving just on that one small studio, and that's 10,000 kilowatt hours of energy saved. And if you extrapolate that out across your top 10%, or a portfolio of buildings, you can see that the impact that would then have to carry out educational campaigns, for example. But that's always my favourite one, because it's one person that has a significant impact on the rest of the building. And one of the things that we then ask is that a profitable resident to have for next year and the year after again, without a kind of educational piece in there.
It's really just a final thank you to everybody that's taken the time to dial in this afternoon. Tamsin, CUBO, thank you for giving us the opportunity, and hopefully it's left you with a bit of food for thought around how you manage your estate. And I'd just really welcome any thoughts, any other questions, anything you want to hear. Please do visit the Utopi website or the email address there, and drop us any thoughts. We'd love to have a chat and meet and learn also a little bit more about the sector. So from me, thanks very much. Really just a final